WordPress Accessibility Day 2024 Accessibility Challenges with Single-Page Applications with speaker Natalie MacLees, co-founder of N Squared. This presentation was recorded October 2024.
Welcome back to WordPress Accessibility Day 2024. And hello, if you're just joining us, my name is Marina, and I'm a UX UI developer for the software agency New Rome. I'll be the MC for this session. Thank you for joining us for Accessibility Challenges with Single-Page Applications with Natalie MacLees. Natalie is the COO and co-founder of Aardvark, and that's with 3 A's. She is an experienced web accessibility professional with over 25 years of combined front-end web development and accessibility experience, including a senior UI developer role at Sony. Natalie is a passionate advocate for accessibility and has made it her mission to train developers and designers to incorporate accessibility practices into their work, building an internet that is accessible to everyone. Natalie loves talking about web accessibility and has been a featured speaker at numerous web development conferences, web development and design meetups, and WordPress-related podcasts. With her newly released web accessibility tool, Aardvark, Natalie is proud to offer an innovative suite of tools that makes reaching WCAG compliance easier and faster while maintaining a high quality of work. I just want to tell everybody to feel free to add your questions in the Zoom Q&A section, and we'll answer them at the end of the session. Use the chat to connect with other attendees. And that's enough housekeeping. Take it away, Natalie.
Great. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for having me. I was actually on the original organizing team for this event the first time that it happened in 2020. So it's really exciting to be back as a speaker. Let me just get my screen shared here. Okay, so we are here to talk today about single page applications. So let's get all together on the same page to get started. What is a spa? We are very unfortunately not talking about the wonderful place you go to get massages and sit in the sauna. We are, of course, talking about single page applications. And I have on the screen the definition from the MDM web docs, but just to quickly summarize, a single page application is one in which we only load one HTML document into the browser window, and any updates or changes that happen after that point happen asynchronously with JavaScript. They could happen just on the browser side, or the browser might make some calls to a server to get some additional information to load up and look at. There are three major JavaScript frameworks that get used for building single page applications. Those are React, Angular, and Vue. They are not the only ones. There are dozens and maybe even hundreds of others if you don't like those three. But most of them, I think, in 2024 are built with one of these three. Now, full disclosure, I myself have never used Angular. I have just a handful of code samples throughout the throughout my presentation today. None of them will be of Angular. I don't have any familiarity with it. I have just a couple with React and Vue, but the general concepts that I'm talking about today apply no matter which framework you happen to be using. So just from the title of my talk, we can tell that there are accessibility challenges with spas. So given that we know that, why would we want to build one? A spa is a great solution if you need to build a web application that feels more like a native application, whether that's a desktop or laptop application or something to run on a mobile device. If you want it to have that very smooth, very fast performance and feel like you're using a native app, a spa is a great solution for that. In certain cases, you can even take advantage of local caching or local storage to make your app work offline. You can build a big library of reusable components that makes it quick and easy to build new views and pages and screens. However, I would recommend saving them just for places where you have an application and not for things like blogs or informational websites. So I have 4 main categories of accessibility challenges with spas. And I will tell you from personal experience that if you go into a community with lots of accessibility professionals and you mention a spa, you'll get a lot of groaning. So accessibility professionals kind of have this immediate distrust when they hear that something is a spa, and that's for a really good reason. They are one of the most reliable sources of barriers and accessibility issues on the web. But I would like to point out that that is not anything that's inherent to JavaScript itself, and it's nothing to do with any of the particular frameworks. Accessibility is possible with all of them. The unfortunate thing is that accessibility is just not the default in any of the SPA frameworks that I have personally seen. So you do have to do a little bit of extra work to make those accessible. So I'm going to run through just the 4 major categories of accessibility challenges now, and then we'll dig into each one in a little bit more detail. So first up, we have page changes, and I have page in quotes there because of course, we're not ever actually doing a page change in a single page app. What I am referring to though is the equivalent of that, where a user clicks a link and we load a brand new HTML document. Now, the problems that we run into with spas is focus management. Where did focus end up after that page change? We might break our browser back and forward buttons. They might not work as expected. And of course, the title element that's in the head of the document only loads up once. So we'll dig into how to address all of those issues later. The next big category is focus management. Now, in a more traditional website or web app, as long as you are thoughtful about the order that you place elements in your code, most of the time focus management pretty much takes care of itself. There's just a few exceptions where you have to put a little extra thoughtfulness into focus management. In a spa, on the other hand, you have to think about focus management a lot, and your users will really appreciate you putting some extra thoughtfulness into where focus is at any given time in the application. The third big challenge is content changes. And by this, I just mean those partial page updates, where a little bit of content is loaded or changed on the page. In this case, we have to figure out how do we let users know that that's there? When should we move focus and when should we not? So we'll talk about that. And then we have the infamous spa problem of lots of custom components. So I have a theory on, like a 2-part theory on why spas have so many custom components. The first one is that all the tutorials that I have seen that teach people how to use things like React and Vue use very bad practice code. So I think it gets learned like right alongside the framework that sure, just add a click handler onto this div. It doesn't matter. But of course, that can cause a problem. We'll talk about it a little bit later. The other reason I think spas have so many custom components in them is that if a developer is going out of their way to build a spa, they want it to feel unique. They don't want it to feel like just any other website, which is why they don't want to have those browser default checkboxes or radio buttons showing in the interface. So we'll dig into some issues with custom components and some ways that you can make those work better for everybody. All right, so let's tackle that first challenge, which is managing page changes. So because we're not actually loading a new HTML document into the browser window, we do have to implement all the usual things that the browser does ourselves. The browser can't do it for us because we're not actually loading a new document. So we'll go through what those things are and how we can handle them. First up, we have to update the history in the browser. So we need to insert or replace an entry in the browser history. You could, of course, use vanilla JavaScript and the history API to accomplish that and implement some kind of routing yourself. You could also use a package that adds routing ability. And if your app has more than just a couple pages, I highly recommend that you would use that. So all 3 of the frameworks that are really popular right now all have a router package that you can install that works very nicely with the base framework itself. I also have seen that there are a handful of SPA frameworks that have routing built right into the core framework, and they don't require a separate package to be installed. So that's another option that you have as well. I also want to address upfront that English is very fun, and there are two pronunciations of the word route or router or root or router. I will try to stick to using route or router. I actually have learned that I use those interchangeably for no good reason whatsoever. So they are the same word, just with two different pronunciations. All right, so we've got the history API taken care of. The next thing that the browser takes care of for us when we load a new HTML document is updating the document title. And we can use a JavaScript document.title to assign a new string to the document title. This does have one small problem in that it doesn't get announced, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So as I said earlier, I don't have direct experience with Angular, but I do understand that there is a built-in title service in Angular for handling just this problem, updating the document title in the platform browser package, which is part of the core framework. For Vue and React, you actually have a couple of different options. So one thing that you could do is you could just update document.title when your component is mounted on the page. So you could just have a method that runs on that mounted hook that would update document.title in your component. Unless you have a very simple application though, I actually wouldn't recommend doing this because you're going to end up with the code that handles your document title spread across all of your components, and it's going to quickly become a big nightmare for maintenance. So what I would recommend doing instead is in React Router, you can use the render property of the route component. So I have just a bit of sample code on the screen showing that render property of the route component. We're passing in a page component, which has a title attribute to it. And when that page component gets mounted, that title will become the document title. In Vue, things get handled a little bit differently. So we have some sample code here showing setting up a route in Vue, which is just a JavaScript object. It's very straightforward. And there is an optional meta property, and you can store whatever you would like in that meta property. So here we are adding a title to that meta and assigning it about us. And how we use that property is we can set up a method that would run on before each in the router that would get that meta value rather, and assign it to the document title. This makes it really easy. You would just define your page titles right as you define your routes in Vue, and then they get updated automatically. You could also use after each, and you could also use a watcher on the router. They would all accomplish the same thing. So now we've got our document title updated, but it hasn't been announced to the user the way that it is when we load a new document, a new HTML document in the browser. So we're going to take a look at some ways that we can announce that to the user. And if you are interested in digging into this topic in great detail, handling page changes in single page apps, I highly recommend an article by Marcy Sutton for Gatsby.js, where she evaluated with real users like a dozen different approaches to handling page changes in single page apps, and published great details on all of the results of the testing. I'm going to go over just a few different approaches today, but if you want to really dig in, I highly recommend that article. All right, so our first option is to use a fixed ARIA live region somewhere on the page where it's not getting replaced when we load a new page. And we would use this to just load in our new page title so that it would be announced when we load a new page. This seems like a really great solution, but in testing, this actually didn't work all that well. It was kind of unreliable and it was kind of confusing for the users. It was also a little bit confusing if users stumbled across this content like later as they were navigating through the DOM, because we don't normally see the document title just sitting as text somewhere in the body of a document. So then I saw a suggestion to just reset that string to null after a delay of 500 milliseconds or 1,000 milliseconds. But of course, now you're introducing even more unreliability into something that wasn't working that well to begin with. So I would not recommend trying this approach, even though at first glance, it seems like it might be the ideal. The next approach would be to focus the wrapper. So I have two examples in my code example here. One would be to add tab index of -1 to the body, and the other one would be to add that tab index of -1 to whatever the container of your app is. And when the page changes, move focus to one of those elements. So this ends up being probably the closest to what happens to focus when a new HTML document is loaded in a browser by default, but this doesn't solve the problem where that new title isn't getting announced. So let's keep looking at solutions. The next one would be to just focus the first focusable element that's on the page after we've loaded a new page. So this could be your skip link that would be at the top of the document. But this doesn't announce our page title either. And it could be a little bit confusing. Like, why am I on this particular link after I changed a page? It might be really unexpected. However, there is a case where this is the ideal solution, which is if you are walking the user through filling out a multi-page form, they fill out page 1, they click the next button, they go to page 2, and if focus is just on that first form element on the next page, they can seamlessly continue filling in the form. And it's really easy and nice experience. So that brings us to our final one, which is my favorite and the one that we have implemented in our app, which is to focus the H1 for the new document that got loaded on the page. So here we would have to assign a tab index of -1 to the H1, and then focus would move to that. Our new page title gets announced because focus is on this H1. And focus is somewhere near the beginning of the document. So it's a pretty reasonable experience for where focus lands and reasonably straightforward to figure out why it's there and how to get around the rest of the document. We were able to create just a reusable component for this page header and then write a directive in Vue that just automatically moves focus to this every time the page changes. So we have just super easy, reusable code in one place to maintain. All right, so our second challenge, which we've already started tackling a little bit because it kind of bleeds into those page changes, is focus management. So we've already talked about how to handle focus management with page changes. So I wanted to just quickly review some other places that I often see focus management not handled correctly so that we're getting those implemented correctly in our spas. The first one would be with modals, and to make sure that we're handling modals correctly. So I'm going to click on a button, and I have a little cursor there to show that I'm clicking on a button. I know that's not how everybody clicks on a button, but I needed a visual. And it's going to open a modal. And the first thing I want to happen is I want to move focus to the modal as soon as it's opened. So there's a few different ways that we could do it. We could move focus to the first focusable element inside the modal, which is probably going to be the button to close it. We could also use that tab index of -1 on the heading of the modal and move focus to that heading. Or we could move focus to the container of the modal. Any one of those will work, and you can try them out for yourself, see which one you like best, which one tests the best with your particular user base to decide on which one you want. Now, we have focus in the modal. While the modal is opened, we need to make sure that focus stays trapped inside the modal. I shouldn't be able to tab and get to links that are behind that modal on the page. If I get to the last item in the modal and hit tab again, focus should go back to the top of the modal. So we need to make sure focus stays trapped in there. Another thing that people frequently forget, hitting the escape key on your keyboard should close the modal. So Make sure that that escape key works, and then also that you have one or more buttons inside the modal that will close it. So I'm going to close the modal now. And now focus needs to return to the element that opened the modal to begin with. So the user can just pick up right where they left off and continue along. Next is form errors and handling those correctly. So on my screen, I have a very simple login form with just an email address, a password, and a sign-in button. And I have an error. The user has forgotten to fill in their email address. So I have an error message showing right under that email address field that says your email address is required to log in. And in this case, the user has clicked the sign-in button, and I have returned focus to that email address field, return focus to the first field that has an error, and make sure that your error message has clear instructions on how to fix what's wrong. I'm currently having a nightmare with a vendor that I'm trying to submit a form to them. And every time I hit the submit button, I just get a message that says something went wrong. And it doesn't say which field or what went wrong or what's happening. So don't do that to people. It's terrible. It's a terrible experience. Tell people how to fix things. And then next up, we want to make sure that we correctly associate that error message with the field so that it will get read out to users as expected. So here is my markup. I have a label, I have an input, and then I have a paragraph with my error message in it. And you can see that my paragraph has an email error ID. And then in the input itself, I have an ARIA described by attribute that references that ID, which programmatically ties together my ARIA described by my input and that error message, so that when that input receives focus, a screen reader would read out the label and the error message. Unless it's voiceover, in which case it's going to make you do something extra to get the message, but it will tell you the message is there. All right. Third big challenge is content changes. So this is where we're just updating a part of the content on the page, and how do we manage that? We need to find a way to notify users that there is new content on the page. And how we go about doing that is going to depend on the reason that we're placing that new content on the page. So first up, if we are confirming an action the user took, so we're confirming that they moved an item to a new place, we're confirming that they deleted an item, or it's an e-commerce application and we're confirming that they added an item to the cart. We just want to provide them with some kind of confirmation that that interaction was successful. In this case, most of the time, the best solution is to use an ARIA live region set to assertive to make sure that that gets announced and that they get that confirmation message. We do not want to move focus in this case. We don't want to interrupt the user, because you can imagine if you were on a page with a bunch of products and you wanted to put 4 of them in your cart, and every time you added something to your cart, focus moved to the cart, that would get really annoying really quickly. So don't move focus in this situation. The next one is an expected update, which means that the user has requested some new content. So they got to the bottom of a list of search results and clicked a load more button to load in a few more search results, for example. In this case, because the user has expressed a desire to get that additional content, we want to go ahead and just move the focus to that updated content. So if we load 10 new search results, we'll just move focus to the first search result that was there. And again, this is most of the time going to be the solution. You always, of course, have to do testing to figure out if that's actually the exact right solution for your particular case. Next up is if we're just sharing some information with the user. So if we have like some kind of process that's running in the background and we want to let the user know that that's completed. If we have maybe an interactive application and we want to notify the user that one of their coworkers has logged in, something like that, we don't want to interrupt the user. We don't want to interrupt what they're doing. So in this case, most of the time, the right solution is going to be an ARIA live region set to polite that would just announce whatever has happened. Your report is ready to download. Cindy just logged in, she's here for the day, whatever it is. We don't want to move focus to anything new. We just want to make that announcement for the user. And then the final situation, which hopefully doesn't happen very often, is that we have some unexpected and critical information for the user. So something has gone wrong. There's an error. The user needs to take action. We need them to take care of something immediately. We want to interrupt them because maybe what they're in the middle of doing isn't working. It's not going to save. They're going to lose their work. You know, something is going to happen, something bad is going to happen unless they get this new content. In this case, we do want to go ahead and set focus to that new content and interrupt the user because they absolutely need to pay attention to this message. So this should be pretty rare that something like this happens, that we have unexpected information popping onto the screen that is critical and requires immediate attention. But of course, if that happens, we want to make sure that users are able to be notified that that content has loaded up on the screen. All right, and then our fourth big challenge with spas is those custom components. So if you, like me, have been building websites for a very long time, and if you are finding yourself uncomfortably close to the 30th anniversary of the day you built your first website, then you will know, like I know, that web dev trends come and go. Nothing is permanent. Everybody changes their mind about everything from time to time. However, there was a trend in the early to mid-aughts that I think it's time to revive, and that was called POSH. And if you don't remember or weren't around to know what that stood for, it just meant plain old semantic HTML. So as boring as it can get. However, it is really important for building accessible spas. So just a reminder, HTML tags have meaning. An H1 tag doesn't just make text large and bold. It actually means something. It actually means that that is a level 1 heading. So I would ask that you please get to know how to correctly use HTML elements like lists, which can be unordered list, ordered list, or definition list, buttons and links, and know when to use a button and when to use a link. Know how to properly set up a data table so that the data can be accessed and read. Learn all about all of the different input types that you have available to you in a form. Learn how to use headings and how they create sections of content that are headed up by that heading. Learn how to use figure elements and captions so that you can tie a visible caption to an image. Learn how to properly set up navigation. Learn how to use ARIA landmarks correctly. Learn how to use field sets and legends for collecting up groups of form fields. And then correctly knowing how to use forms, which includes labels, form tags, radios, checkboxes, and many other things. This is not a complete list of all of the HTML elements out there, and they are not in any particular order. And we are going to dig into a few of these right now. All right, so first up is ARIA landmarks. And using these in your spa makes identifying sections of the app easier. So at a bare minimum, you should probably be using main, banner, and content info in your spa. And if you have some kind of navigation bar or menu, you should probably be using nav. So we'll take a quick look at what those look like. So here is the markup for a banner landmark. We have a header element with a row of banner. So yes, you only need one or the other. You could use just a header tag, or you could use another type of element with a row of banner. But using them both together doesn't hurt anything. It's a little bit of redundancy, and it ensures that if you have a user on some older technology that could only support one or the other, that it's still going to work. Next up is the main landmark, which is very easy to remember because the tag and the role are the exact same. They're both main, and this is how we do it. Main, role equals main. A navigation landmark is similar. We have a nav HTML element and a role of navigation. Usually that contains an unordered list of our nav. And our content info landmark, which is a footer. It's a footer tag with a role of content info, and that's usually the repeatable information that's at the bottom of your page. You know, your copyright statement, your terms of service, your accessibility statement that you have for your spa, right? Wrap your form elements in a form tag. So none of these, nothing stops you from actually just plopping an input element just directly into an HTML page not wrapped in a form tag. But you should actually always make sure that if you are using a form element, that it is wrapped in a form tag. And here is an example of some view code with the form element here wrapped around our input and button. The form tag is important for two reasons. Number one, for screen reader users, having that form tag there triggers forms mode in the screen reader, which makes it easier and faster for screen reader users to fill in your forms. And of course, you want your spot to be easy and fast to use. And the other reason is that if you have any fields that might be ideal for that autocomplete that's built into browsers where it could just fill in like your name or email or phone number automatically for you, that only works if the form elements are nested inside of a form element. All right, field sets and legends. Please use field sets and legends. I see people forget them all the time. So let's take a look at what happens when we don't use them. So here I have some HTML code. I have a list of checkboxes. You just have to imagine there's more than one there. And before them, I have a paragraph tag, which gives me the instructions for what this set of checkboxes is about. Select your preferred hobbies. And then I have a list of hobbies, each with a checkbox. So visually on the page, this might look okay, but there's no programmatic association between the checkboxes and the legend or that line of instruction. There's no, it won't get tied. It won't get read in forms mode. So here's what we should actually do instead. We should wrap our entire set of checkboxes in a field set tag. And then inside that field set tag, the very first element should be a legend element, which gives us that line of instruction for what that set of checkboxes is about. So here I have a field set with a legend inside. Select your preferred hobbies. And now that legend is programmatically tied to that list of checkboxes. If one of those checkboxes gets focus, a screen reader would read out the label for that checkbox and also the legend so that we know what we're answering, what is reading an answer to. It's one of our preferred hobbies. Next up, use a label for all your form fields. Please use a label for all of your form fields. So here's a bad example. I have here a short form. I've got an input type text with a placeholder and no label. Placeholders are not enough. They disappear as soon as you start typing into a field and they're gone. Also for a select, what you'll often see is the first default option used as a label, right? With just select your country, in this case, filled in as the text inside that option. But once somebody makes a selection, they can't tell what they selected. So I actually had an experience about a month ago. I was filling out a form that had maybe 10 fields on it that used only placeholders. And I got most of the way through the form when I got interrupted. I had to go answer my door and then I got distracted and did a few other things. And I came back to finish filling out this form. And it was completely, it was completely unreadable. What was I answering when I filled in these answers? I had no idea. I actually had to go back through the form, delete every one of my answers, and then paste it back in again to figure out if I had filled it incorrectly before I submitted it. So please just use a label element and make sure that it is always visible. So that looks like this. We have an input type text with a label before it, with the text inside that explains what that input is for. And we have a select element also with the label before it that explains what it is for. And our labels are programmatically tied to our inputs or our select with a for attribute on the label that references the ID attribute on the input, so that those are programmatically tied together. And we get a couple of benefits from that. Of course, a screen reader will read out the label when the input or select receives focus. And then also clicking on the label will activate the form element, which gives us a much bigger area for clicking things like checkboxes and radio buttons and makes them easier to use. All right, learn how to use buttons and links correctly. So very quick summary. If I click on it and it takes me to somewhere new, a new page, a new view, a new screen, or to a new place on my current page, it should be a link. It should be an A tag. If I click on it and it does anything else, it should be a button. If it opens a modal, closes a modal, opens an accordion, deletes an item, submits a form, that should be a button. Update your current page. So if you have navigation on the screen in your spa, then you would want to use the ARIA current attribute set to page on the page in the navigation that represents the current view. You will have to use some JavaScript to remove that attribute from the old page and put it on the new one when you have that page change in your spa. And there are packages that could help you manage that, but you could also do it in just vanilla JavaScript. So just this ARIA current equals page on the current item in your navigation. And then please avoid interactive divs and spans. So the frameworks themselves will not stop you from doing things like this. So I have React code here with a div with an onClick handler that runs a method called do this. I have Vue code with the same thing, click handler that runs do this. Here's why you shouldn't do this. Problems with interactivity on divs. First, it's not included in the focus order. So if I can't use a mouse and I'm tabbing through your spa, I can't even get to that div. It won't even receive focus. Second is that even if somehow I do manage to get focus on there, it's not going to respond if I hit the enter key or the space key the way a button would. Third, it's not going to announce to a screen reader that it's a button. So a screen reader user can hear the text, but they don't know that it's an interactive element that they can press on. It's not supported in high contrast mode. So users who are flipping their browser to high contrast mode, they don't get that support for it. And then if it's a link, it doesn't have that nice right-click context menu. If I right-click on it to pick from that list of options. So you might be thinking, well, sure, but can I just fix those items? You could add a tab index of 0. You could add also a key up handler and check to see, is it the space bar or the enter key being pressed? And if it is, go ahead and run the same method that you attached to the onClick handler. You could add an ARIA roll of button to it and on and on and on. Or you could just use a button. You could just replace a button. So I have a button with an onClick handler for do this in React and also in Vue. Do this and you get your accessibility for free. You don't have to do anything extra to make that work for anybody. All right, to wrap up, a few last reminders. Before you commit that code, before you merge that PR into main, here's some things that you want to make sure you do. Test everything without a mouse. That code you just wrote, put your mouse on the other side of the room and using your keyboard only, try to use it. Can you? If you can't, then you have some things to fix before you merge that in. While you are doing that, is focus visible? Can you tell what element has focus at any given time as you are tabbing through the screen? Make sure that focus is always visible. Next, please be sure to include alt text for any non-text content. As an example on this slide, I have an icon-only button with a completely ambiguous icon. Nobody knows what this button does. So this would be a case where you might even want to have visible text on your button, but at a bare minimum, please include alt text on that button so that when people encounter it, they know what the button does. They know what to expect. Next, use skip links. Make it easy to get around your spa. Make it easy to get to the different sections of content. Include skip links. And then finally, test, and then test some more. And test not just yourself, have other people test, have real users test. You will learn so much more about your spa by watching users use it than you will ever learn testing it extensively yourself. So when you think you're done testing, you're not. Test it some more. And that is everything I have for you today. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Natalie. That was really informative. And we do have a bunch of questions here in the Q&A for you.
Great.
First question. This is from Anonymous. Email address field with error should probably have an icon besides red error text.
Yes, that's true. Yes, my
Okay.
example wasn't as good as it could have been.
All right. What about ARIA error message instead of ARIA described by?
Oh, actually, I don't know about ARIA error message. That is a new one to me. I will look into it.
So helpful, these attendees
I know.
All right.
This is what's great about accessibility. We all get to learn from each other.
Yes, absolutely. All right. I think I understand this question. Could you please suggest what title should be provided for the application where a user can open and add multiple pages in the layout at the same time?
They can open
Maybe they're
and add
talking about
multiple
ARIA page
pages.
current.
Oh, they could add multiple pages at the same time, but they can only be on one page at a time. Like only one page could be loaded in the browser at a time. So that's
Right.
what you would want to specify as ARIA current, unless I misunderstand the question.
Okay. Let's move on.
Okay.
So we have you you mentioned an article at the beginning of your talk, and we have a couple people asking if you could share if you know it, or sorry, if you could share it, the title again.
Sure. I don't know the title offhand. It is by Marcy Sutton, and it's on Gatsby.js, and it has to do with page changes in spas. Let me see if I could find it very quickly. And I can share the link
Okay.
on social media or in the like Slack chat or
And
whatever after my talk as well.
fantastic. Okay, thank you. All right. Okay. How do you announce toast messages? I know they can be challenging for some users as it may appear in a corner of the screen.
Yeah, toasts are a real accessibility challenge because they disappear and maybe you didn't, I mean, it happens to me all the time that like, I'm like, wait, what did that say? I didn't get
Yeah.
my eyes over there in time. They are a real challenge and I would be really careful with using them and be really thoughtful about how you implement them. I think an ideal situation would be if they stuck around until they were dismissed by the user, but I know like sometimes that means they're going to stack up and it can get kind of sticky. It is something that's going to require lots of testing with your particular users. And I think sometimes what you're going to find is that a toast just really isn't the right solution. It's just too challenging to make that work.
Interesting. All right. Got a question from David. An upvote. Any suggestions for creating accessible off-campus menus or multi-level menus like Apple's website's mobile menu?
I am not familiar with Apple's mobile menu, but I do know how I have, worked with off-canvas menus. I think they're talking about like where you have the hamburger menu and usually, the little 3 lines and you click it and the menu slides into view. So, I mean, one thing that you would want to make sure is if that menu isn't currently in view, that it can't receive focus. So you shouldn't be able to tab into that menu if it's not visible. So that's one thing that you want to be careful of. And then when those menus open, sometimes they open and they're just kind of over on the side. Other times they open and they completely take over the interface and they're more like a modal. If they're more like a modal, then all the modal like rules apply, where you want to make sure you move focus, trap focus in there. If it's not a modal, then your button is probably already inside the nav element, so you can just leave focus where it is and make sure that once the menu is open, you can tab through it. But that when it's closed again, you can't get focus in there anymore. When it gets closed, you want to return focus to that hamburger menu, and make sure that they can't tab into the rest of that menu. I see that done incorrectly a lot, that they will allow you to tab into them when they're
Okay.
not visible.
Yes, yes. Okay. Now, here's a question. Would you recommend put the footer navigation in a nav role equals navigation, or would this be misleading when also having the main nav at the top of the page?
Oh, yeah. So if you have two navigations on a page, that's completely allowed. You could even have 4 or 5. You could have as many as you like. What you want to do in that case is give them accessible names so that you can distinguish them from one another. So you would have one called, a header menu and one called a footer menu, so that you could easily tell when you're accessing those, you can tell which one you're on.
Okay. Rosita asks, how can you make sure that focus stays in the modal?
That is probably the trickiest part of modals. So, like one approach that you can do, I'll just talk about some really broad approaches, and then you can do some research online to figure out what one you think might work for you. One approach that I have seen is actually to take the entire rest of the document and remove tab index from it so it cannot receive focus, so that just you have nothing else on your page that can receive focus now. And so you're just kind of guaranteed by default then that the focus will stay in your modal. The other thing that you can do is handle that in modal code yourself, so that you detect if focus is on the first element and somebody hits shift tab, you're going to capture that and move focus to the bottom of the modal, and vice versa. If focus is on the last item and somebody hits tab, you're going to capture that and move focus back to the beginning, so that you don't let that focus ever get out of the modal. So those two different approaches I've seen implemented successfully, and I'm sure that there are others that I don't even know about.
Great. All right, we have about 2 minutes left, so maybe we can get one more in,
Okay.
potentially two. So any tips for SPAs that are wrapped in native mobile apps?
All of the same rules apply. And I think probably I haven't personally myself built a native app, but I think probably you might get some little extra accessibility boosts, like especially Apple tends to be very accessible and Android doesn't do too terribly on a lot of things either. You might get a little extra boost from that accessibility, but of course you would need to test your app. If it's available without that wrapper, you need to test it that way, and you would need to do accessibility testing on it as a native app as well, just to make sure that there weren't any differences between the two.
Okay, great. Is it best practice that if you have something like a hamburger menu with a lot of links, that when you reach the last item in the link, the next focus should go back to the close button, even if the menu can be closed with the escape key?
If it is a case where it's a modal menu, I would say yes, that's what you would want to do. Like if it's, it's taken over the whole screen, and you would definitely want, like I said, to have focus trapped in that modal. If it's not, you don't want to trap focus in it, because if a mouse user can access other stuff on the page while that menu is open, a keyboard user should be able to as well.
All right, fantastic. Okay, well, thank you, Natalie, and thanks everybody for attending the session. You did a great job. You can continue the conversation in chat or on social media using the hashtag WPA11YDay, and you can also use the hashtag WPAD2024. We also appreciate if you go to 2024.wpaccessibility.day/feedback to provide anonymous feedback for our speakers on their presentation. You can enter to win a t-shirt while you're there. And so now we'd ask you to stay tuned for Accessible Firebrand. Why can't I use my brand color theme? And if not there, then where? Coming up next with Mark Alphys and Deneb Pulsifer. And while you're waiting, don't forget to visit our sponsors pages to grab virtual swag and enter for a chance to win great prizes. All right, see you right after the break.
Thank you to WordPress Accessibility Day 2024 sponsors. Platinum sponsor 20i. Easily build, deploy, and manage all your projects with 20i managed WordPress hosting. One UI for all your servers, apps, sites, databases, security, DNS, and email. Perfect for agencies, e-commerce, developers, multi-site hosting, and high-traffic sites. Platinum sponsor Equalize Digital. Since all they do is accessibility, every post on their blog is an accessibility resource. You can find webinar recordings, articles, and additional resources at equalizedigital.com/resources. Platinum sponsor WP Engine. WP Engine provides the most relied upon and trusted WordPress products for businesses, brands, and agencies of all sizes. Thanks to our gold sponsors, GoDaddy, Grackle Docs, Gravity Forms, Green Geeks, TPGI, and Yoast. And thank you to our silver sponsors, CodeGeek, Drake Cooper, Elementor, Overnight Website, Pressable, Second Melody, and Accessibility Collective.